Well, good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. I think we've started the day off with really an inspiring presentation about what's possible in Africa, what's already taking place, and I hope all of you are ready for the next session, which will lead off, I think, very nicely into the themes that we've already covered in the first part of the morning. My name is Una Osili. I'm a professor of economics and philanthropic studies here at IU. I'm also a very proud Nigerian and African, and have another hat that I wear here. I'm the director of research at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. We recently took on a very large global project, so really interested in what's going on the continent and some of the reforms that are taking place. Now, to kick us off, we have a very distinguished panel. I'm going to call them up, and each of them will give a short presentation, and we'll take questions after that. So I'll introduce them briefly, but their bios are in your packets, in your notebooks. And I'll start with calling on Shakira Motan. Is she here? Yes, she's here. Okay, so come on up. I'll give you a very quick overview of her bio. Her title is Trade Commissioner, South African Consulate General. She resides in Chicago at the South African Consulate General in Chicago. She holds an honors degree in international development and has an extensive experience in the public sector. In her role, her current responsibilities include the promotion of South African goods and services, as well as attracting investment to South Africa in both the Midwest and the West Coast. So Shakira will go first, and then after that, we'll call on Eliot Pence. I'll just maybe just wait until Shakira is done, and I'll introduce Eliot. So thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to thank the university for giving me this amazing opportunity to visit Indiana, as well as to engage with all of you about opportunities not necessarily in Africa, but in South Africa and the current challenges that we're dealing with. I'm actually speaking to a lot of you this morning. I'm quite pleased that many of you are experts on the African continent. In fact, many of you are aware of the current trends and dynamics existing in Africa at the moment, and I would say have visited more African countries than I have. So it's quite refreshing to engage with a crowd that knows that when I speak about South Africa, it actually is a country on its own. Often in Chicago, I get asked, where in South Africa, or which country in South Africa are you from? So it's always a challenge for me to explain the geography about that. And thank you for helping me with that. This is the first time that myself and my colleague, the political counselor, are here in Indiana. But besides the fact that the US and South Africa have a history and long trading relationship, as well as bilateral investment flows with each other, from an Indiana perspective, we're pleased that there are many prominent companies that have been in South Africa for decades. Companies such as Cummins, such as Eli Lilly, Biomed Holdings, and we also have the presence of two South African companies here in Indiana. One of them is called iLab and provides software solutions. So I'd like to contextualize South Africa and where we currently are, and then talk about the opportunities and challenges in the presentation. One of the interesting things that we're currently experiencing in South Africa, and I think many of you may be aware of the comedian Trevor Noah. So he likes to make fun of both US politics and South African politics. And currently, the political climate in South Africa is very interesting. And I'm not going to delve into that into much detail, but what I would like to say is that over the past 2 or 3 weeks, we've had some very good and positive reports that have been published. The first report is the A.T. Kearney report, which is a report that focuses on investor confidence, global investor confidence, And for the first time in 2 years, South Africa features in that report. I believe we are number 25. There are 2 countries in Africa and Middle East that feature that haven't been featured in the past, and that's the UAE and that's South Africa. South Africa features because despite the current landscape in South Africa, we have a huge legacy and activity in terms of infrastructure development that is on an ongoing basis. And many multinational companies still view South Africa as a launch pad into accessing the rest of Africa. The other report that was just published this week is the Ernst & Young Africa Attractive Report. I think it reviews about 46 countries, and South Africa ranked number 2, along with Kenya. Morocco obviously was number 1, and the comforting aspect of this report is that between 2015 and 2016, there has been a 6.9% increase in FDI projects in South Africa, an increase from 19 to 41. And in terms of volume, not value, in terms of volume, South Africa is still regarded as the largest hub of foreign direct investment in the continent. So, obviously, I am going to focus on the good stories and all of the positive things that are happening in South Africa and in Africa, so I wanted to share that with you. Another thing that I wanted to share with is that having such a prestigious panel here, there are people on the panel that can speak about the different opportunities. I mean, we've just heard about the renewable energy and all of the different energy projects happening with Power Africa. South Africa is pleased to be a recipient of that. And there are many other project opportunities that we're looking at in the future with Power Africa. In addition to that, we have an expert on AGOA, and this is something that pleased me so much because it's something that not many American companies are aware of, and it's something that even we as South Africans need to harness in a better fashion. I was in Los Angeles a few months ago. I was attending a trade show focusing on, well, I would like to say fashion, but to make it sound more conservative, I'll say the apparel sector. And the companies that were, the countries that were maximizing the opportunities over the past 5 years, you see a spike in their exports, are Kenya and Ethiopia. And then the Chinese companies, recognizing the advantage of the AGOA benefits in terms of clothing, textile, and apparel, have been investing in the different economic zones in Kenya and Ethiopia. And it's just been a phenomenal increase in exports in those sectors to the USA. Unfortunately, as South Africa, we still have to grow further in that aspect. I would like to, I have a very long presentation, and I always mention this every time I deliver presentations. I do like to talk a lot. My slides are total 56 slides. However, I do have the ability to speak fast and to summarize. So I think that this slide was developed because I had the mindset that most people are not aware of the size of the African continent, but I don't think that's relevant to this audience, so I won't go into that. Our growth rate is quite conservative at the moment. Those are 2015 figures, but the figures released by Reserve Bank show the same 1.3%. So we're still in the positive zone. So that is something that we look forward to in the future and over the next few years. And again, South Africa is viewed to be the gateway to a huge consumer market. And we have diversified industrial sectors, which I will go into detail later. I've mentioned the FDI projects, and I've mentioned the latest reports. Something that I find very interesting, and again, I have a bias because I was previously based in the Middle East. That was my previous posting. But we have many South African companies active all over the world. And they are very strong in the construction and infrastructure development sector, not only in the Middle East, but in Africa as well, and they could be viewed as potential partners for infrastructure-related opportunities in the rest of the continent. But in terms of architectural and engineering firms, as well as the provision of the steel, we played a role in many of the prominent landmarks in the Middle East. And we hosted something that is now 7 years ago. It was the 2010 FIFA World Soccer Cup. And we managed to erect those stadiums in record time. And those stadia are still in use currently, multi-purpose for different purposes for sport and recreation. And they're a prominent feature in the South African landscape. Who are our export and our trading partners? In the past, the US was our #1 trading partner, but as we see, not only in the recent reports, for example, the Africa Attractiveness Report, and over the past few years, China is more prominent. Even in terms of the difference between #1 and #2, the US comprises 7% of our exports value. I've just got a breakdown of trade, and an interesting feature in the trade stats is that in the past, if you looked at the top 10 trading partners that South Africa has, most of the countries would be European countries. And what we find now over the past few years, because of our focus as well, both on a national priority level and from my department, our commerce department's level, the focus is on intra-Africa trade. So more and more we see African countries featuring as our top 10 export partners. And there are numerous reasons for that. Some of the reasons are our trade agreements with the various sub-Saharan countries. And then the other reason is that the infrastructure is very streamlined and it's very accessible to use South Africa as a launch pad to get your products into the other African markets, especially given that Sub-Saharan Africa, that will give you duty-free access. We still have primarily commodities-driven trade composition, but we are now in several iterations regarding our industrial policy action plan, and there are a lot of incentives available in terms of financial support to foreign companies, of which many US multinationals have taken advantage of, to locate manufacturing premises in South Africa. Interesting in terms of what we export to the US, we actually have similarities in many sectors, such as the automotive sector, aerospace and defense-related, capital equipment, and then, of course, a huge chunk of commodities and agricultural and agro-processing. Although the growth rates have not been phenomenal, we are comfortable with it because there has been a steady increase in terms of both the exports and imports. I wanted to give a snapshot in terms of the ports of entry where the trade enters into the US. Of course, Houston is oil and gas related, and New Orleans, but we find that we've seen phenomenal increase in the West Coast, in Los Angeles. Between 2015 and 2016, there was a 56% increase in terms of South African exports to entering through Los Angeles. The thing with South Africa-US relations is that although the South African population is small here in the USA, a 2013 report recorded it as about 83,000 South African expats here in the USA. We have, as a country and as the private sector, contributed a lot to the different sectors here in the US, and this is something that I don't say with any sarcasm. We are actually helping to make America great again, because there are several companies that have shown a commitment to the US market. One of them is a previous state-owned enterprise called Sasol, and there's a $9 billion investment in ethane cracker. And of course, when speaking to my colleagues, other trade commissioners from European countries, they would mention larger numbers, but I think the fact that we're so far away from the US and we're a much smaller country, I think it's quite significant that we've contributed to 500 permanent jobs in Louisiana. We also have had investment in different sectors. We've had Steinhoff acquiring Sleepy's, which is a mattress firm company. That happened last year. And then again, very interesting, we have a fleet management company that has a startup in Santa Monica, and we will definitely be informing them about the opportunities that they should look at here in Indiana. I also had a breakdown of the states that contribute to FDI into South Africa. And then, of course, I'm listing multinationals here that have a presence in South Africa, but I think there are opportunities for US business in different sectors and on different scales and levels. You don't have to be a multinational to be successful in bringing your product or services to South Africa. I've listed a few others. It's diverse and in different sectors. And of interest to yourselves here in Indiana, one of the companies that is active in South Africa is Royce, who've recently upgraded their plant in the Western Cape for the manufacture of engines. Again, we are also strong in the automotive sector, so we've had significant expansions in investment with many of the American OEMs in South Africa. One of them is Ford, manufacturing the new SUV that will be exported to other African markets. And the reason why companies look at South Africa favorably, still look at South Africa favorably despite the political landscape. The other interesting thing is that our currency has been performing very well recently. I was looking at a report this week saying that the rand has actually been doing well, and that has reduced our current account deficit. And it has also led to an increase in bond purchases. So there's a lot that's still positive about what's happening. And one of the reasons is the various trade agreements we have with our neighboring African countries, our access to a huge consumer market. And then the latest one is a tripartite free trade area, which brings together Central and Eastern Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. And it gives access to a huge market, a consumer market. And as we know, the next big story after India and China is Africa, and Africa has the largest population with the youth force and the working force, so it is the future in terms of consumer markets. We have great trade agreements also with the EU, and what we've been doing, as many countries has been doing recently with the UK, is that we've been negotiating separate access and agreements with the UK on an independent level. And as mentioned, we have an amazing trade agreement with the US, which is called the African Growth and Opportunities Act. I'm not going to go into much detail on it, but it allows for over 7,000 product lines in different sectors, such as agro-processing, the automotive sector, and different capital-related sectors. Here are the opportunities that we focus on in South Africa. And it's diverse in terms of the scale. It's advanced manufacturing, it's aerospace, it's mining, minerals beneficiation, renewable energy, agricultural, agro-processing, biotechnology, business process outsourcing, offshoring. And we have representation, I would say, in almost every sector by American companies in that. I'm not going to go into more details in terms of the opportunities in each sector. I am available to speak to you one-on-one about that. And I would like to just end focusing on the different focusing on the different financial incentives that we have available. So we can provide, as the Department of Trade and Industry, financial support for different elements of the business in terms of improving your competitiveness, in terms of manufacturing, in terms of services-related industries, as well as infrastructure investment. Something that's really interesting that I wanted to touch on is the film industry in South Africa. More and more, we find that companies are using South Africa for pre- and post-production facilities because our film incentive and financial support for that is quite competitive. So many American movies are actually filmed in the Western Cape, and we have the infrastructure, the companies, and the expertise available for that. A lot of information in terms of the financial support that we provide. We also have a host of trade shows. And the trade shows as well are viewed to be a hub for Africa. So there's a steady stream of American companies that are visiting South Africa on a monthly basis to participate in these trade shows and to showcase their products and services. And I regularly engage with the US Commercial Service in some of the states. And they themselves, again, visit South Africa more frequently than I have. I've last been in South Africa about 15 months ago, and I have a colleague at the Illinois State who visits South Africa once in 3 months. So he's able to tell me more about what's going on back home than I know. So that's really interesting for me. So I'm going to end my presentation on that. I don't know if there will be opportunity for questions. I have spoken a lot. But again, I'm also available for one-on-one, and I would like to invite all of you to please visit us in Chicago. We would welcome seeing you in Chicago and hosting you at the consulate and having a nice discussion about how we could support you. Thank you.
We're going to have all our panelists present first, and then we'll take all the questions together. So please save your questions for just after the second and third presenters. We'll go right to our second presenter, Patricia Sachs. Sacco. She is the founder and president of Africa Femmes Performantes, Inc. She founded this corporation in 2003 to promote African women's skills and to build connections with business women around the world. In her role today, she'll also be talking about the fact that she was nominated to the 2017-2018 African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA Advisory Board, for expertise and demonstrated commitment in advancing U.S.-Africa trade, investment, and cooperation. So we're delighted and honored to have you here, and I know you'll have a lot of wisdom to share with us about AGOA and some of the upcoming opportunities on the African continent with the gender perspective as well. So welcome, and over to you, Patricia.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
I'm coming from a French-speaking country, so excuse my bad English. Okay, my name is Patricia Seki. I'm the president and founder of a global business women organization, Africa Femmes Performantes, meaning African Women of Excellence. For 10 years now, we have been organizing global conferences in 3 continents, Africa, Europe, and America, to strengthen economic bridges among our members. Most of our members are small and medium enterprises owners. So there is a great challenge to develop their activities. We observe that they lack a lot of education, expertise, and capacity building when it comes for import and export. As an advisory board member in the AGOA Civil Society Network, we are making AGOA work for them. So here, the AGOA Civil Society Network Secretariat was founded by 102 members organization from the USA, Mauritius, Kenya, South Africa, Namibia, Nigeria, Mali, Lesotho, and the Republic Democratic of the Congo. This network was launched in 2003 in Phoenix, the Foundation for Democracy in Africa, and the Mauritius Council of Social Services were elected as co-chair and empowered to establish and manage the secretariat for the network and make plans for the AGWA Forum. Here you have Fred Oladende, who is the president and chair of the AGWA Civil Society Network. And this is the forum held in Gabon in 2015. The network is about a consortium of non-governmental organizations, as you can see on the slide. Small to medium-sized business representatives, chambers of commerce that are interested in the successful application of AGOA for the benefit of the US and African people. The focus is on improving the ease and understanding of US-Africa trade and to fully use the benefits of AGOA by securing a place for African countries in the global economy and raising the standard of living of masses of Africa. The mission of the AGWA Civil Society Network is to empower African people through their civil society organization and working with government and businesses to take maximum advantage of AGOA benefits on behalf of the citizens of their countries. The network accomplishes this mission through the following methods: policy, working with parliament and congresses; advocacy for recommendation for the AGWA civil society sessions; education. This is very important, the education, providing technical assistance where feasible for public and private sectors on AGOA compliance and trade capacity, and tracking the impact of AGOA specifically and trade generally on Africa's societies. The objective of the AGOA Civil Society Network is increase US-Africa trade, economic development, establishment of good governance, transparency, sustainable democracy, and human rights throughout the countries of Africa. The Africa Trade Development Center is an initiative of the Foundation of Democracy in Africa, launched in 2011 in Miami, Florida, based on a recommendation from the 2011 AGOA Civil Society Forum in Zambia. The Africa Trade Development Center is housed in the Miami Free Zone, a federally designed area that is considered to be outside of the commerce and customs territory of the United States. The Africa Trade Development Center facilitates and promotes bilateral trade between Africa, US, and the Americas using the state of Florida as a trade hub. The Africa Trade Development Center is a one-stop center and marketplace dedicated to providing trade development services for manufacturers, importers, exporters in Africa and countries in the Western Hemisphere. The Africa Development Trade Center is the first of its kind in the United States with a physical warehouse location and a virtual business mall designed to sell small and medium enterprises products and services to the world. The center provides professional consultancy and technical assistance to clients in the areas of trade finance, insurance, freight forwarding, customs, brokerage, trade and investment law, and banking. The objective of the Africa Trade Development Center is to turn small and medium enterprises into engines of economic growth in Africa, reduce supply chain constraints for export-ready small and medium enterprises from AGOA-eligible countries, reduce costs associated with global trade, like duty elimination, duty deferral, insurance costs, inverted customs duty savings, minimize the barriers associated with importing African small and medium enterprise products under AGOA, promote U.S. services and manufacture goods into potential end user in Africa. Here we have all the services provided by the network: market development services, identification of distributor and sales channels, representation for your company and your product at business events, trade shows, identify buyers, sellers, determine the best market to sell your products, determine what type of buyer will best fit your needs and the ability to meet the supply. The benefits of the Africa Trade Development Center is to establish an African trade community closer to the market. It helps small and medium enterprises to meet clients' needs and delivery requests with speed and ease, access new markets and clients of all sizes efficiently, store a generic inventory and then customize it for specific destinations, keep inventory in Miami to be used for trade shows and display. These are some of our success stories. BMW is, oh, the mic, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Here are some of our success stories here. BMW is an industrial equipment from South Africa, textile from Lesotho and Mauritius, oil from Angola, Nigeria, and Mozambique. And I can state here that for my personal experience, we're working a lot with women in Cameroon, Chad, Gabon, Guinea, Republic Democratic of the Congo. And we have noticed that 80% of those countries' economy are head with women. So this area here of success story of the AGWA program, the field of activity are not stated here. That means that we have to make a lot of effort on helping them, improving them, so that they can reach the international market. So now, since its inception in 2000, AGWA has been the cornerstone of U.S. economic engagement with sub-Saharan African countries and has helped to increase two-way trade between the U.S. and the sub-Saharan Africa. Technical assistance, business planning, improved decision-making capabilities helps to answer the question whether or not to enter the market. Serves is an evaluation tool for use in comparative studies, assist in tracking business progress as well as the growth of competitors, assist in identifying appropriate business partner and distribution channel. Export plan. The purpose of your export plan is to create an effective action statement that includes specific objectives, establishes a timetable for implementation and short milestones. The plan should be simple. It need only be a few pages long, viewed and written as a management tool, measurable so that you can measure the degree of success of the plan and help motivate yourself, personal and potential lenders, investors. The export plan should, at a minimum, include the following information: marketing, competitiveness, and culture. The culture is very important. Pricing, packaging, labeling, and trademark, distribution and logistic, financing and payment terms, custom, agriculture, and other compliance issues. Personnel and operations, post-AGWA strategy, export budget. Branding and packaging. Branding is one of the most important aspects of any business, large or small, retail or B2B. An effective brand strategy gives you a major advantage in increasingly competitive markets. Your brand differentiates your product from your competitors. Is your product the high-cost, high-quality option or the low-cost, high-value option? Your brand is your promise to your customer. What can they expect from your products and services? Packaging should not be no longer be considered as a cost item, but as an investment that adds value to the finished product. 55% to 80% of the consumer's decision to buy is made while looking at the packaged product, and consumers are captivated by unique products. Business coalition. Form business coalitions to address your country's most pressing economic development issues, such as high transport costs, limited telecommunication network, and limited access to financing, and advocate for enhancement of trade policy, such as more competitive real exchange rate, improvement in trade logistics and trading times, and the creation of industrial zones. Work closely with the AGOA Civil Society Network to implement the civil society recommendation from the AGOA Forum in Gabon regarding trade capacity building under AGOA. Participate in business network opportunities through trade shows, trade mission, business-to-business events, and conferences. On this map, you can see here the eligible countries on AGOA. But now the Democratic Republic of the Congo is no more a member of the AGOA because of the government now. So the Democratic Republic of Congo is out of the AGOA now, although it has been one of the founding members. Thank you so much. For additional information, please contact Annette Smith, the program coordinator. You can have her information on the screen, and I will be available to discuss one-on-one with you if any question or any suggestion. Thank you so much.
And I'm going to call all our panelists actually to join us up here, including our new addition to the panel, Eliot Pence. He's the director of McLarty Associates, where he advises Fortune 200 firms and private investors on market entry and expansion strategies. He serves as the executive director of the U.S.-Nigeria Council, a 501c3 focused on building targeted partnerships between Nigerian and American investors. In 2014, he co-founded the Africa Expert Network, a technology platform focusing on expediting deal origination and due diligence. He's also an adjunct fellow at the American Security Project and serves on the board of the Africa Leadership Network. So with these three very distinguished panelists, I want to say thank you, first of all, to all of you for being part of this panel. I'm going to kick us off just by asking the panelists to reflect a little bit. We've talked about some of the opportunities. If they can just say maybe a minute, 2 minutes, each panelist say what they think the real opportunities are on the continent today, and maybe be specific where you see areas of opportunity, sectors, countries, maybe groups that haven't been served in the past, and then what are the challenges? So talk about the opportunities, but also the challenges, and if you can, keep your opening remarks to about 1 or 2 minutes, and then we'll open it up to discussion by the audience and questions. Yes, so we'll start with Eliot.
Thanks very much, Una. Can you hear me? Okay. Thanks very much. Well, as Una said, I'm Eliot Pence with McLarty Associates. We advise primarily U.S. companies investing abroad. I run the Africa practice. We were set up about 20 years ago by Mac McLarty, who was President Clinton's first chief of staff. In terms of opportunities, for the last 15 years or so, what you've seen is a convergence of African economies, each growing at sort of 5 to 11%. So a real rise across the board. What's happened in the last 2 or 3 years is a divergence. A lot of those economies now are not growing at rates that they had been for the last 10 years. And you're really getting to see which countries have put in the right policies, which investors had taken the right course. And that happened 2 years ago, basically around the commodity price fall and the Ebola crisis really revealed the extent to which the continent is not as many of you know, a sort of coherent whole. There's 54 countries. There's 52 cities that have over 2 million people. So it's a really disaggregated process of entering Africa. You don't enter Africa, you enter a country. So I think the sort of smarter, sophisticated investors are seeing the opportunities in commercial corridors. Obviously, South Africa plays a major role in that from Durban up, but you know, from Namibia at Walfish Bay up into Zambia and DRC, from Nairobi Mombasa into Uganda, another important commercial corridor, and then obviously Lagos and Benin. So I think looking at the opportunity set, really focusing on the cities and the commercial corridors is important, not really seeing the GDP growth as being an important decision-making factor. I would never enter a country because it was growing at 11%. You'd enter a city or you'd enter a specific sector, but you wouldn't really invest in Egypt or Morocco because it was growing at 11%, even although the fundamentals are quite good. I think in terms of 3 challenges that I would outline that U.S. companies tend to have is in sort of thinking about the market the right way, relating to the stakeholders in a way that demonstrates empathy and understanding of the situation in which broad swaths of the continent is in, and then understanding the challenges of implementing, so sort of TRI. So thinking about the market. Many American companies sort of define their market entry strategy by looking at numbers. 90% of African economics and economies and markets are informal. You're not going to find the data that might lead a decision, a board to say, let's enter Nigeria, or let's enter Benin, et cetera, by looking at market data. Often your biggest competitor is sort of an invisible owner of 30 stalls, or if you're a consumer goods company, and you're never going to see that, you're never going to know it. So we're doing a thorough assessment of the market, and frankly, trusting your partners. The partners on the ground are going to know, where the opportunity set is, where the challenges are, and they're going to be their best guidance. In terms of relating, McKinsey did a study last year that demonstrated that there's 700 companies that have over $1 billion in revenue on the continent. I'm certain most American companies didn't see Africa that way. So there's major, large, sophisticated, capable businesses operating across regions, various regions. But what's interesting about some of those companies is a large percentage of them are family-owned businesses, and they're not the sort of traditional multinational. And when you're working with a family, you're really working with 2 or 3 individuals, their entire lives, and those of their relatives and sometimes their community are bundled up into the success of that company. And so understanding the role of that company in their market is really critical, and knowing, for example, that titles like managing director or whatever doesn't really matter. You need to know sort of who the decision makers are. If it's the son or the cousin or the whoever, you really need to put your time into understanding that dynamic. And then lastly, on implementation, Africa's not plug and play. You're not sort of, the institutions are, generally speaking, I'm being quite sort of broad brush here, but are not efficacious in the way that they might be in the U.S. or in the West. And because of the absence of institutions, it really forces one to know sort of networks and relationships and trust networks and relationships. So you have to spend a lot of time cultivating those, because that's where trust is built. It's in the network and your personal relationships. I should also say that implementing in the West, we often sort of rely on the public infrastructure and the public goods. When you are doing business in Africa, you're often required to build your infrastructure in which you need to do business. So Dangote was mentioned earlier. Dangote is investing in flour and sugar and so forth, but he's also building the roads that his goods are going on. So factoring that into your investment is really critical. I think a lot of companies get there and say, well, why isn't the government doing this? The government's chasing a bunch of things. I mean, if you were a government and 40% of your population had HIV/AIDS, That's a crisis every day. That's a real challenge. So building your road for your sugar plant is not a real priority for you. And having a degree of empathy and understanding that, you know, if you're investing in Africa, you're investing for a generation, not a sort of quick win here and there.
Thank you so much. Talking about challenges in Africa, I will talk on women. I will talk on women because that is my field of activities. Today, women, as Eliot just said, the economy is informal. 80% of the economy of Sub-Saharan countries is informal. So, and women are working a lot on agricultural field, you know, handicraft, and all those sectors are held with women. And the real challenge is education, capacity building, so that they can get into the process of selling the goods in the region, even in other countries, the neighborhood countries, or in Europe or America. This is the real challenge, education, because they don't know the process, they don't know how to do it, they don't even understand the AGWA program, they don't understand the program. So if they are willing to work, but they don't understand the process. So I think that we should invest more on education, on capacity building. In terms of opportunities, I can say that the AGWA program is a real opportunity for them to bring their product here in America. This is a real opportunity. And you can see on the table, you have the African conference in 2017. That will be the 19th edition in Miami. This is a great opportunity for people to increase their sales, to meet buyers and distributors. You know, we have to help them, you know, reach this kind of conferences, this kind of opportunities. And as I said, the challenge is on education and getting them on the process. I've been working with women in the Congo. They brought us some samples here in America 2 months ago during our international annual conference here in Washington, D.C. They brought us some sample of pure honey from the Congo, and what they need is to be able to export them here in America. So now we are in the process with the FDA to see if those products are good here in America. So the intent is here. They really want to do something with America. We have women from Cameroon. They brought some sample of white paper. They want to export them here in America. Women from Guinea want to extend the textile. Women from Mali, with the shibara, they want to export it. And what we can do to help them is to let them get into the process and come here in America through the AGWA program. And I think that we should be able to increase the sales both sides. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. I can't hear my voice as loudly as I did before, but as I mentioned in my presentation, Africa is a key focus for South Africa. More and more over the years, if you look at our national export strategy, we have moved away from our traditional partners, and more we are focusing on our neighbors. It's because we see the huge untapped potential in those markets. We see the fact that there is duty-free access for us within the Southern African development community. The fact that there's been strides in terms of infrastructure development, and the fact that there is a need and demand for a wide variety of goods and services in these African markets. And the growth rate, despite the GDP rates slowing down, the demand for these products is phenomenal. I know that some countries, not necessarily countries of focus due to sanctions-related issues, but I just wanted to give an example of our neighbor, Zimbabwe. And we basically, as South Africa, participate in various trade shows and engage with the government on many initiatives. Besides Zimbabwe, the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa, and as well as other parts of African countries, in South Africa, we've developed an Africa Export Council. So this is a collaboration between private sector and government, whereby private sector from various industries is represented, and they engage with government on a regular basis in order to communicate about the challenges and to see where intervention or any facilitation is required on a government level. And so we find that there are endless opportunities. If we look at the private sector in South Africa, in the retail sector, for example, supermarkets, in many of those countries, you will only find South African branded retail stores available because South Africans know how to operate in the rest of Africa. They have been operating in Africa for very long, and in certain cases, they also partner with foreign countries and companies because there's awareness that if you are to enter into certain African markets, it would be beneficial to look at partnering with a South African company who has that experience and expertise. That's in terms of looking at joint venture opportunities and collaborating on the other African markets, of which we also have institutions like the New Partnership for Africa's Development, and on an African level, we have infrastructure-related projects that companies can participate in. But internally, on a South Africa level, the latest drive that we have been embarking on is the promotion and promulgation of the special economic zones and the different measures that have been put in place. And we call it provinces, but you would call it on a state level. In terms of increasing our industrialization and having specific sector focus. The way in Indiana you are looking at biotechnology and IT support and software development, we also have various sectors allocated in the different states and different support mechanisms in these special economic zones. They are purpose-built locations whereby the infrastructure is developed. There is a port, be it sea, land, or air-related port. In every special economic zone, there's reduced tax rates, there's a mix of funding, and then there's also access to skills development and training and research and development if you locate in those special economic zones. As a result of those special economic zones, many companies have expanded their investments in South Africa and announced new investments. So that's the opportunity. The challenges, of course, the challenges were mentioned previously. There are challenges related to governance, in certain cases, exchange rate volatility, and then the trust in some political leaders. Having said that, as mentioned previously, those are factors that can be managed and that can be dealt with. The more important factors to look at are the fundamentals in terms of policy, economic policy, and what is government's attitude to welcoming foreigners into the country in terms of investment and business opportunity. And more African leaders are more welcoming towards this foreign investment, and that's why there's such a huge presence by Europe and by US companies and by Asian companies also into the African market, because the return on investments, although the risks in certain cases may be high, are just, you cannot compare. Okay.
Heard a lot from our panelists about gender, about taking the data at face value, because in some places you may not have data. I wanted to actually maybe turn our attention also to Eliot, because he didn't have a formal presentation. Earlier on, someone from the audience said, what advice would you give to, say, an Indiana company or institution that's looking at entering a particular African market? Could you kind of just quickly share with us what you might suggest, and then we'll open it up. What should they do? Very practical, concrete. I thought that question earlier was a really good one. It's great to have general overview information, but maybe steps that you would take.
Sure. Well, I think the first thing that I would do is manage your expectations, or manage the company's expectations. I think, especially with a fast-growing market, if you see 7, 8, 9, 10% growth, the expectation is that you, within the course of a year or two, are going to be profitable. Quite often, what I have seen with, and this is true of multinationals and private investors, is that you're only successful in Africa on your second investment. Your first investment is essentially a loss. It's education for your second investment. So manage your expectations, manage the board or your bosses or whoever it is, expectations. The second is find a partner. One can invest one's own time in identifying the market and sort of getting the government incentive systems lined up, and that might work in places like South Africa. But in the majority of Africa, your success is defined largely by the interest and capabilities of your local partner, and identifying that individual, that family, that company, and spending a lot of time building the relationship, aligning incentives, things that you would do otherwise in other markets, but it's absolutely critical in the African context. Because, as I say, the absence of institutions makes relying on that individual, that partner, et cetera, so critical. The third is, I'm not a proponent of the government is critical to your business. I think, in a lot of the African markets, the opportunities really have nothing to do with the government. It's not about a sort of power or infrastructure play or whatever. It's about a consumer play, and the fundamentals are so interesting and exciting. But what you do need to do is identify what the government's goals are and demonstrate how your investment is going to promote the goals of the government. I can tell you what 80% of the goals are. It's jobs, jobs, and jobs. If you're creating jobs, you will be doors will be opened in a way that you might otherwise. Selling into Africa is interesting and exciting, but it's not the real opportunity. It's investing in Africa. That's the real opportunity. So I think thinking about Africa from those sort of perspectives is, I think, what will help you. And there's obviously, a ton of advisors and consultants. McKinsey's in 10 markets there, BCG, et cetera. I think, it really is critical finding the right person to do business with. I think in a lot of African or American states, it'll be some random person that says, look, I'm a member of the diaspora, or I did Peace Corps here, or I did whatever. That first decision is critical. That individual has to be the person, that they have to be connected, they have to be capable, they have to have skin in the game. Don't just take anybody's advice on, Nigeria is growing, et cetera, we should go, let me take you, I know this guy who knows this guy, et cetera. Really take time to vet that first individual that takes you into the market, because they will define how well you succeed, if you succeed, et cetera.
Okay, so to summarize, do your homework, know your partners, but I really like the idea of investing in Africa. It's kind of a long-term value proposition. So with that, we don't have a lot of time, but I do want to open it up for questions. And if you want to direct your questions at a particular panelist, or if you'd like all three to touch on it, I'm happy to bring the mic to you. Any questions for our panelists?
I was thinking about Patricia, and the presentation on AGOA was really enlightening. That's a good network. That's one of the problems we face, how to make AGOA effective. Two things came to mind was to do all that you said AGOA network is doing, I'm just wondering about the staffing involved in that. And then I noticed, coming from Liberia, that Liberia is not a part of that network. And I'm curious, how can a country become a part of that network?
Thank you. I think Liberia is part of the AGOA program. Liberia is part of the AGOA program. Concerning the network and people working on the AGOA program, we work with a lot of embassies in the Washington, D.C. area, African embassies. So with them, we can extend a lot of information around Africa. And even here, when we have meetings like our spring conference, we invite all the embassies to join the conversation so that we can move forward and make the program happen. Can you hear me? Oh. So I was saying that in the Washington, D.C. area, we work with embassies in Washington, D.C., and we always invite them to join the conversation during our spring conferences, or even now we have the Democratic Republic of the Congo, who is no more eligible. We're working for them to join back the program. So we're working with the ambassador of the Democratic Republic of the Congo in Washington, D.C., so that he can relay the information on the country and get back to us.
All right. Other questions? Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Osili. Great panel. All three of you. Bonsoir. I've known McLarty back in the Clinton administration. I went back. He was a great guy. Questions for all three of you. I'm Dr. Toby Malachi, founder, Chief Executive Officer, and Global Business Diplomat of Malachi Group worldwide here. I worked on AGOA through our great U.S. Senator, who was then chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Richard Lugar is also co-sponsor of the bill. I understand, Dr. Osili, you just come from testifying for that great Senate hearing. The problem that we had, we got AGOA through. I worked on the SME part of it, so I'm glad to hear about the SME part. We just got it reauthorized again, 2 years ago, I think. It was a difficult task in getting it done, but we got it done again. I think a lot of American SMEs, particularly in a diverse population like mine, aren't really aware of AGOA and what it can do. I worked on a lot of our free trade agreements, including the two in the news right now, the most. So something you mentioned I think is very keen, and that is to talk a little bit more about the Trade Development Center that you have in Miami initially in a foreign trade zone. Because working through that foreign trade zone really makes it easier for U.S. SMEs to do business with Africa, because there's no tax or duty until that product comes outside the foreign trade zone. If you can elaborate a little bit more on that. And then to your question, Shakira, which is an excellent presentation, our second deal in South Africa was with CESO, and it was the code. And I imagine that's a little bit, I suspect, why China's there also tapping into that. But could you please talk a little bit more about the Economic Empowerment Zone Initiative? It used to be a stipulation to have at least 25% of South African workers if you want to do that. I don't know if that's still applicable or not. Great advice, Eliot. If you'll come back just a little bit, anything you'd like to add to that was just great advice.
Let's take just one more question here, and then the panelists can respond to all the questions together.
Again, thank you, panel, for being here today and answering our questions. I actually would ask Ms., and I hope I pronounced your name right, Motan. You showed an initiative on your slide. There was an initiative called the Black Business Supplier Development Program, and then I know South Africa also has had the Black Economic Empowerment Initiative that has been involved. And one of my interests, I was a former member of an organization out of Atlanta called East African American Business Council, and one of my interests was helping minority, particularly Black small business, medium and enterprises here in the U.S. link up with their partners and particularly through the Black Economic Empowerment Program that you had in South Africa. Can you give us some more details on those types of initiatives, and what advice would you have for a minority-owned small and medium enterprise here in the U.S. linking with those type of enterprises?
Any other questions quickly for the panel, and then they can respond to everything together. Did we get all the questions? Yes.
Thank you. So you mentioned that that first partner is really key to your making or breaking it in Sub-Saharan Africa. Are there any matchmaking services, or sort of how do you go about finding that right partner to help ease your way into doing business in the continent?
So we have quite a few questions. So maybe, Eliot, I'll have you go first because yours is quite general, and then go to the rest.
Sure. The way I would do it is, so there's trade associations, U.S. Chamber, Corporate Council in Africa. I run one specifically on Nigeria. Attend a dinner or a conference. They're staffed. We have 3 staff in Lagos looking for partners at the moment. And say what your specifications are, what your good service is. And then they will, also the embassies have something called Gold Key Service, where they can provide an outline of the various different partners. Ultimately, though, it's you going to the country and having 50 conversations in the course of a week, and then assessing, what's the cultural fit, what's the strategic, fit, et cetera. But, I mean, make sure that they have skin in the game. There's capital there. They have capacity. Because I think what a lot of American companies do is they go to the biggest name, like Dangote. Dangote is in 200 JVs or MOUs. Even though he's going to be a great partner on one level, he's not going to have the time that you expect for your company. So you really do need to be focused on who is the time, who is the capital invested, and who is the capacity, and spend 6 months trying to figure that out.
Thank you for stating the free zone in Miami with the Africa Trade Center. I want to just invite you guys here to come to attend once this conference in Miami. It takes place once a year on the month of September. The Africa Trade Development Center offers customized workshops, organize one-on-one meetings with buyers from across the Americas for select exhibitors and from Africa. So this is a rendezvous very important for those who want to really get involved in the African market and both sides. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for both the questions. They actually essentially touched on the same issue. And what has been happening here in the US market is that we have been working very closely, and we have a good long-standing relationship with the Minority Supplier Development Council. We've been working with, obviously, the Illinois chapter. And we also participated in it was the 50th Business Opportunities Fair that happened in Chicago about 3 weeks ago. And the history behind that is that the Minority Supply Development Council obviously focuses on minority business in the US. And South Africa's relations with that council is that we engage with them from a perspective of business opportunities for those companies in South Africa, as well as getting our South African companies exposed to those companies. So it's basically facilitation of matchmaking and business-to-business meetings. The reason that we place a priority on minority business is obviously South Africa has a legacy of apartheid. We have a Gini coefficient that is not very favorable in terms of income disparities, as well as we have a layer of large companies listed publicly on the stock exchange, but we don't have a significant pace of sustainable SMME and participation from the broader economy. So what we have done is we have developed a range of, from a government support level, we've developed a range of incentives. And the Black Business Supply Development Program is one of them. Basically, it provides funding or a cost-sharing grant for business development, as well as sharing the cost of capital equipment. We have a few other incentives also available. We have a new structure that was established a few years ago, focusing on cooperatives, because we see that cooperatives have been quite successful in other African countries. We haven't really worked on that. And we have a few cooperatives, for example, in the wine sector. That was an industry that traditionally didn't have anybody from the previously disadvantaged communities, and it didn't even have much of a presence of women in that sector. Now we have cooperatives which include women and previously disadvantaged communities. Besides that, what government implemented, I think it was 3 years ago, it's something called the Black Industrialist Program. And one thing to note is that as an American or as any foreigner entering into South Africa, we do not have any legislation that forces you to take a local partner and that forces you to use a BEE partner. But what we do have is we have sweeteners. For example, if your BEE partner or your local partner has 51% ownership in the company or shareholding in the company, it means that the financial support you will get from government is much higher than you would get from having maybe 51% foreign company owned. So there's no legislation forcing you to use minority or black-owned enterprises, but there are a lot of government support in terms of financial and non-financial support. So the Black Industrialist Program was a new incentive that was developed because once we analyzed the structure and the volume of the companies that are successful in South Africa, we noticed that we didn't really have a core contingency of black industrialists. And we're striving to develop them in South Africa. And the incentive includes funding for, again, setting up a production facility, tax breaks, skills development. And again, when procuring for government tenders, if you can show your, we call it Black Economic Empowerment Rating, not just in terms of the ownership of a company, but in terms of management, control, and continuous skills and training and development of your staff, then you would get greater access to there's a scoring system that's used, so you would get greater access to those procurement opportunities from government. The other thing that we're also doing is designation of local content, especially in the procurement, in the energy sector, and in the infrastructure sector like rails, locomotives, because again, we have a lot of Chinese and Japanese companies that have successfully won bids in the rail sector, and there are in some instances designations that local content should be between 18 and 25% depending on the product. So I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much to all our panelists. Let's give them all a round of applause. I think they'll be available right afterwards to answer questions, but I know that we have a short break right after this, and then we'll move to our next panel. So thank you again.